On that note, let's kick off our power hour for the evening. We're joined by Robert Peterson. Robert is CTO of Persynergy Green Energy Consultants. He's the president of Energía Humana Consulting, and he's a fellow with Luma, the Clean Energy Innovation Fellow with Luma Energy here in Puerto Rico. You can see beautiful Condado Beach behind him. Robert, thanks for being a part of Power Hour. How
My
are you?
pleasure. Good, good.
So I've
Awesome.
got a series of questions. I know we've talked about some of this stuff before, and this will be there's a lot of different things that we want to dive into. We had branded this conversation as expectation management with regards to the energy transition, and in spirit with what we're interested in doing in the National Clean Energy Week event on September 24th is really linking what's happening with Puerto Rico with what's happening in similar circles off island. And that's where I think expectation management really comes into play. I have my own questions about benchmarking different elements of Puerto Rico's energy transition, energy challenges. I certainly, when I look around, have a hard time finding the right analog, and some make a lot more sense than others. And then you switch topics and they no longer work as benchmarks. And so we're going to get into that here in a little bit. Your project with Luma, and we'll get into some of the details here as well over the next hour. Your project is around grid forming inverters. So I want to start by kind of reflecting on where we started the Energy Forum, which was a conversation around workforce. And how does that fit into the technological advancement across the board? You know, you're also a specialist in AI and its role in the energy transition, 5G and its role in energy installations. What with the technological advancement that we're seeing, what are the gaps that we're likely going to miss with regards to the human capital side of things? What core skills should we be fostering that we're not?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the one thing that Puerto Rico probably has an advantage that, but they have to leverage it is you do have quite a bit of momentum behind the US federal government financing a lot of this. I wouldn't necessarily say cutting edge, but certainly leading edge of what's going on and what can be incorporated not only in the continental United States, but also the Caribbean. I mean, what Puerto Rico suffers from is yes, some neglect over the decades, but also it is also an island problem that any island in the Caribbean has to deal with this at some point. And I would say that Puerto Rico is nearing the early portion of this transition. And I would say that UPR Mayagüez is probably the premier technical university in the Caribbean. And, you know, Luma has a lot of technical experts from Latin America. And really, this could be a very much of a technical hub on how things are designed, how they're applied, and also workforce development on how do we get the techs in the field, whether it is building up microgrids or it's a developing better standards for residential solar. So all those things have not been really fleshed out yet. And because Puerto Rico is kind of at the leading edge of this design in the US, they have the ability to really become instant experts in the region.
Yeah.
In the same vein of technological advancements, what's the role of AI in the grid modernization project?
Yeah, so really what it comes down to is as we go to more and more, let's say, energy storage, and more away from fossil fuel generation, we have something that, you know, the simple is called inertia. And just think about it as, you know, the bicycle tire spinning. When it's spinning, it has momentum and keeps going. Well, with solar or wind, there is no momentum. So if a coal plant goes offline or natural gas, you've got a big heavy generator spinning, and that's got momentum, and that allows you to make adjustments mid in the middle of, hey, the one thing about energy is supply has to meet demand. So if supply starts dropping off, you either have to shed or, you know, have rolling blackouts, or you have to pick up the energy somewhere else. So the idea of AI is taking the batteries mounted around the island and you start trading energy back and forth at the speed of light. And AI and machine learning has that ability to make up for the lack of inertia. And this is something that will be widespread across the United States as well. So like I say, what solutions hopefully are developed in Puerto Rico can have great bearing with the rest of the United States and the rest of the world.
You make me think that, you comment that supply has to meet demand, and it doesn't have to.
Right.
We've
Right.
experienced some outages in certainly the last several weeks, but this is not an immediately new issue where supply has not met demand, and there's a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and a variety of clients across the island have borne the brunt of that in necessity, right? In some ways, they certainly see it as a necessity. The system doesn't inherently see it as a necessity. It brings us to, I think, an important piece here, and again, building on the bridge or in the spirit of expectation management. There's a debate going on in Puerto Rico right now between a couple different camps here that say the bidirectional flow associated with major influx of residential solar in particular can't be managed on a antiquated, fragile grid, as is the nature of the one that we have on the island. And of course, bringing into the conversation your expertise with regards to grid forming inverters and their role with regards to the sophistication and capacity of those two things coexisting.
Give us some hope or pop our bubble, one or the other.
Yeah, how do you understand that challenge?
Well, I think you've just rephrased what CP put in the thing. He wants his AI overlords to fix voltage and frequency control.
Well, and the beauty of that is whether CP wants it or not, he will get it. And so
True.
But my question, I guess, Robert, is how do you understand that challenge? And maybe just very briefly, the way I see it is it's neither an issue of the grid or an issue of net metering. It's an issue of the fact that both of those things are existing simultaneously for at the pace they are. And so correct me, add to it. How do you understand the challenge?
Yeah, so really, there's a lot of talk about, and I think it's very important that the plan is to break up the mainland island as into a bunch of microgrids, and think of it as a puzzle, and each piece has its own energy source, being a battery or whether it's hydroelectric elevated storage, anything like that, where you have the energy source locally. So if you have a major event, natural disaster, or something happen, you have access to energy locally. And really what you're talking about is energy storage in place of transmission. And transmissions are the big 230 kV lines, the big lines that run in the mountains that have difficult having access to it, and they're delivering energy being produced typically near Ponce and delivered, towards the northeast where the industrial and the population base is. Now, the nice thing about transmission, you deliver a lot of energy very, very efficiently. But the downside of it is if those lines go down, you affect tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands, where if a battery were to go out in the neighborhood, you're talking about knocking out dozens of homes versus tens of thousands and higher. So you are mitigating the overall island risk. And even if you have a weather event come through the island on one area of it, you are allowing the rest of the island to function a little bit better that way. And that's the idea. And then the idea of putting in renewable energy, not necessarily solar, residential solar, but utility grade solar, is now you can store and keep charging. And one idea is you have a primary feeder system running through a neighborhood or a municipality, where you connect the gas station, the grocery store, medical facilities, pharmaceuticals, and they get better power delivery than the rest. So you may unfortunately be without power at home for air conditioning and other functions, but you would have essentially the ability to walk to critical supplies. And that is the idea eventually that they're pushing for. But it's the whole thing of, one problem you have is the puzzle hasn't even been started to put together. If this is essentially like 150 piece puzzle, you got to get the first 10, 15, 20% installed, and then building upon that becomes easier and better and more reliable. But right now we're dealing with the fact that, to your point, that a lot of the island runs out of power, on a weekly basis. That becomes a higher priority than necessarily building up these more reliable and resilient systems.
Right.
So it's a chicken or the egg thing. Do you fix reliability right now, or do you build out for, and let's not sugarcoat this. This is a 10-year plus system to put in there, and I would put it 10 to 20 years. And so
starting as soon as you get out of bankruptcy.
well, and there you go. Yeah, we can go all through the whole finance part of it, but if you start today, a lot of these equipment delivery issues are 2 years plus, right? So even if you started today, you're really not going to see something effectively, or what I would imagine it as, if you're losing power once or twice a month, then all of a sudden after a few years, you notice like, well, I only lost it once this month or once the last couple of months. It'll gradually taper off. It won't be, and I guess what I try to impart on people is, this is trying to, you are not knocking down a whole house and rebuilding it. You are living in the house while you're fixing the plumbing, fixing electricity, fixing everything in there, but yet you have to live in it, right? So it has to function. So it's not the best way to do it, but it's the only way to do it. And so what do you tackle first? And that puts, the utilities in a tough position. And to your point too, about not having access to capital, Tom, with bankruptcy makes things even more difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it doesn't affect like even just execution. I mean, you could speed up the spending of a lot of that federal money if you're out of bankruptcy. You could generate working capital. But on top of that, we had a conversation last week, and we're losing people, right? I mean, there's this turnover because there was this expectation that 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, PREPA was going to be out of bankruptcy, that there was going to be more resource available, that we needed to staff up for the types of talented, experienced people who could begin to work on this, solve the problem, set these things up. And 2.5 years later, nothing's really started. They've been sitting around writing on whiteboards and thinking about things, and never getting to the point where they can start executing and testing. So they're leaving, right? So we're gonna have to recycle and start up again once it stabilizes, once we've got money, and that's another part of the runway. Yeah.
Well, and it is perfectly on brand for this conversation, because I see that as an expectation management failure. And there's a conservationist from half a century ago named Edward Abbey, who dealt a lot with water policy, particularly in the Western United States, and wrote many of the water laws, or was the sort of the grandfather of water laws in the West. And his saying about desert cities is, there's exactly as much water in the desert as there's supposed to be. And so one of these things where you build a 1 million person city in the middle of a desert, and you're like, well, there's not enough water. It's like, well, there's actually exactly as much water as there's supposed to be. There's not supposed to be a city, perhaps. And so there's a lot of innovation, and we can talk about drip irrigation. It's a different conversation. But the point being, if we had to rewind the clock 2 or 3 years ago, it would be a matter of setting proper expectations to say PREPA's bankruptcy and the bondholder negotiations are not a year away. Yeah. They might be 5 years away, or 3 to 5 years away. Robert, to your comment about renovating the house while living in it, there's a balance between what is true long-term sustained renovation and what are band-aids over broken pipes, because sometimes it feels a little bit like we're buying in bulk lots of band-aids with the limited capital that's available. And my question is, how sustainable are the works? It's sustainable in the long, just the very literal sense of it. How long will those fixes be sustained? Are those permanent works? Are those band-aids? And maybe as a follow-up, how do we tease out the short-term horizon and the long-term horizon to properly adjust our expectations to say, okay, these are going to be Band-Aids for the next 2 years. And then in the next 3 years, we fully anticipate that PREPA is out of bankruptcy, at which case we'll be able to do X. And if it's not out of bankruptcy, we have a plan for Y. And maybe that nobody's got a crystal ball here, but you plan, and the world is contingent, and so you plan for contingencies. How do we tease apart the short-term and long-term horizons of these projects?
Let me throw something else in there too, because I mean,
because these are easy questions. Tom,
you get out of bankruptcy, right? I mean, it could be 2 years before you get to the point where you have real return to the markets in one way or another for working capital. So it's still going to be kind of Band-Aids in that period, financial Band-Aids, if you think. But the difference is that now that you're out of bankruptcy, certain decisions in terms of counterparty risk and other undertakings in terms of contractual structures and things now open up. Like there's nobody that's stopping you from doing these things. So you can generate more participation, more third party construction, infrastructure, et cetera, can go. But the thing that we're talking about in terms of what PREPA must do, that really requires them to have money, them to have working capital, them to have the resource to be able to funnel the federal money and hire people and do everything else. So and that might take a little longer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we talked about this a little bit, but really, I think we have to be a little bit more intellectually honest with the general public in Puerto Rico that this is not an easy fix. And whether it was presented this way or not exactly distinctly described, is there is going to be some growing pains here, and sometimes putting up current reliability can be directly in conflict with renewable energy build out in the future. So when does short-term planning cross over into long-term planning? And always that middle ground there, which we're not even at yet, right? I mean, to be honest, but part of the problem becomes, when do you say, how are we going to do this? And I think one of the benefits we may be able to look at is, in the 1930s, we had the electrification of the farm country in the United States, and that was really in the 30s and 40s, and can be directly linked to the growth of GDP within the nation, making everybody electrified. Now you went from people who never had it to getting energy, so there's a little bit difference between people kind of having it and then then getting it full term. But these are similar challenges. The challenges are a little bit different, but it's the same type of overall hurdle to take over. And really what it comes down to is having a commitment from the government, a ability to do this technological, and then also have the bearing of the general public to endorse this. And I'm not saying all of that is there right now. I mean, I think the technology is there. We can argue whether or not the government fully supports this, or depending upon who's in office, how this handles. And even from that point, you've got everything from local jurisdiction to federal agencies saying this is how we should be doing it, let alone the governor's office. So you have that. And then part of it is, I really think you need to is start having conversations with the general public saying, like, this is going to take some time. This is not just flipping a circuit breaker. This is the full rebuild, but we have to give us some time here. And I think if we're honest with the general public about that, I think they're willing to give that some time. But my concern is, we feel like, whether it's Luma or anybody else, we have these federal dollars coming in. This is all getting better. And my concern is, if we have a major natural disaster event come through, they're going to say it's the same thing all over again, even though effort has been put in there. But that's one of those deals where it's going to take some patience and continue the communication with the public that we're working on this. It's not going to happen next week. It's not going to happen next year. It's going to, maybe in the 2030s, but, and that no one's going to like that answer. But do you want to keep going this direction where it's getting progressively worse, or do we have to reverse this, take our lumps a little bit, and long term it'll be a better situation?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
and let's dive into that a little bit more, because what are the short-term priorities then? We had a fascinating conversation with regards to AMI metering, which
Yeah,
brings its own set of challenges that I want to get into for a second. But putting AMI aside,
yeah.
what are those short-term priorities that may look like sustainable band-aids? And that seems almost like an oxymoron, but even to CP's comment in the chat with regards to temporary generators, I see those as temporary support that will have long-term value because we'll may need backup power for the next 20 years, right? And so at some point beyond their immediate need, they're going to have value as backup.
Yeah. The
And
most
so,
expensive power is the power you don't have, right?
absolutely.
I mean, it's, you know, I wouldn't say it's a unique situation, but you know, the system that's been just 50 years of malfeasance and non-investment and, you know, taking money out to give it to somebody else and not repairing it, and then bankruptcy and storms knocking it down, etc. You know, so here we're 6 years, basically 7 years, whatever it is after the storm. I'm losing touch. And we're still, because we're still in bankruptcy, we're still that we haven't made any major improvements. And the things that are there that we've been putting together with duct tape and baling wire have finally just fallen apart to the point where you can't do that anymore, right? And we've lost things along the way. And if you like to look at the papers, they say we're 1,100 megawatts short of what a reasonable amount of available generation would be. And now that would be to run and hit peak and allow you to take things out to give the maintenance and things like that. But you know, and so where that puts you is kind of like 200 megawatts or more below what you kind of need just to do the daily stuff, even with the solar and everything else that's come on and reduced some of that load. So I mean, that's got to be like the first priority, right? You've got like rolling blackout brownouts that are going on the island. So yeah, everybody's power is going to be out. You got to get that done first. And so you bring in new generation. I read something today that the Ecoelectrica Unit 2, which has been out, I think it's Unit 2, maybe it's Unit 1, that has been out since the earthquake, I think, or shortly after the earthquake, is maybe going to be back within a quarter or two.
Yeah.
That will help immensely. But that doesn't, but that's that, and so maybe that takes like some of the immediate pressure off. Maybe that allows the politicians to come in after this election to kind of go, oh, good, I can have somebody, nobody's yelling at me so much anymore. Maybe I can be honest with people now. Maybe I can be honest with myself. Maybe I should figure out what the hell is going on so I can be honest with myself and the people. It's just, in any event, I mean, that's why that's the priority, right? I mean, it's people can yell about things and play politics, etc., but that's the first priority, and then everything else comes after that. So, yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think one of the conversations we should have is, yeah, we're bringing essentially what they call peaker generators, which typically are natural gas, but they can be other fossil fuels. And the immediate pushback tends to happen that, wait, I thought we were going renewable. Why are we going after fossil fuel? And to your point, Tom, is like you got to do what is feasible right now.
yeah,
And also what Sam had said that, hey, these peaker plants can also be a backup when you have, whether it's renewable energy issues or other things like this. With the being peaker plants, they tend to be smaller generation amount, not the big, large plants. And they can be strategically located around the island, much like we were talking about microgrids that give you
yeah,
energy access around the island. And then you can dip into those when you have peak load days. And to what we said before, you know, generation has to equal load, and you know, whether it's 100% of load or the load's at zero, it's going to be balanced out. So having these peaker plants in there and say this is to complement and improve reliability, that we have to communicate that to the people of Puerto Rico. And then, you know, I mean, people are smart enough that if you can lay out understanding of how this is, instead of just saying typically, well, we've got a plan and we're going to execute it. Well, that, I think the people have been down this road long enough to realize we've heard that story before. So give us some details of what's your plan of doing.
Yeah.
And as we lay that out, then say, okay, I understand this a little bit more. A dumb example that, hey, you want to buy an EV, not separate from Puerto Rico, but you want to buy an EV, but you can't afford that. So you're stuck with the, 10-year-old pickup truck running off of gasoline. That may be your only choice. You ultimately want to go to an EV down the future, but it's not feasible at this moment. So you get by with what gets the job done at the moment, and then you can start making strides and then say, okay, I see, like you said, that was, a good Band-Aid that held things off for an X period of time. And then we've ultimately too, that gives you the flexibility as you put in some of these renewable energy, you've got something running in the background that can spin up in the background and run while you institute this stuff.
I think that's good. I think we should stop calling this Band-Aids, right? I mean, it's not a boo-boo, it's a broken leg, it's a splint, it's a cast that we're talking about putting on here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's we say Band-Aids because that's a popular, easy thing to do. But yeah, really it's it's a bit more than that.
I want to dive into one of these things here, because one of the things that I think Luma has relatively communicated relatively well is saying, look, we've got three top priorities. Now, whether this might be a semantic thing, whether Luma has not articulated it well, or it has never reached the ears of the people that need to hear it, we can talk about those. I think both of those may have fail points, right? And perhaps in abundance. But one of the key things that the three things that Luma's talked about is vegetation management, advanced metering, and substation and equipment repair, right? Those are the ones that they've really laid out as these are top priorities from a T&D perspective that have a whole lot of enabling power for both distributed and utility scale renewable deployment. They are capacity builders, right? They're not just casts over broken legs, so to speak. They're actually investments that make, they have multiplication effects in terms of enabling stuff down the road, which in a high inflation environment goes a long way to say, this isn't just money that becomes less valuable in the future. Yeah. It's money that will actually improve the capacity for people to do stuff in the future. You shared some absolutely fascinating insight on the advanced metering infrastructure puzzle.
Yeah.
Can you share in some brief words what we had talked about briefly? Because I think that even if people understand that's a priority, they may not understand what goes into installing an advanced meter, and what it's not like vegetation management's just cutting leaves away from the line. It's actually a little bit more complex than that. What goes into it?
Right. So there's a couple things involved with that. So if everybody, advanced metering or AMI is the acronym that's used in the industry. But when you put AMI on there, you have something that's is one direction typically. But as soon as you put on rooftop solar and are gonna enter that energy back into the grid, you have to have a bidirectional AMI. So if you all of a sudden get solar and you're going to sell back to Luma, and they go to install these meters, what they experienced and didn't expect, and these are the problems that you run into when you're trying to innovate and apply technology. Unexpected things crop up, and what they've run into is they go to install a new AMI, and obviously with the warm weather, there's some advantages to that, but also being in the Caribbean, it's a very a caustic environment, and you get some of these old analog meters, and you pull them off, and basically they look like a big outlet plug. So there's a socket that this plugs into, and when you pull that out, it's been so corroded where some of these have been there for 20, 30 years, and the socket falls apart when you pull it out. And so now you've got a house or a unit that no longer has power to it. You can't put the old meter back in because the socket has completely degraded. And then there's typically something here that is always defined by in front of the meter and behind the meter. Everything behind the meter is responsibility of the consumer, and everything on the other side of the meter is the responsibility of the utility. Now, through no fault, I think, of anybody, you pull the meter off, it disintegrates. Now this is a $900 to $1,000 repair, and they are without power until they pay for that. And the funding to do some of this work is not allowed to be used for this by utility. So now what do you do? How do you finance? Not everybody's got a $900 or $1,000 check to write just to go ahead and have this fixed. And then you add into it that, you know, what, 47% of Puerto Rico is below the poverty line. This is a very heavy lift for a lot of people. So how do you figure out that when the utility truck shows to put in the AMI and something like this happens, how do you figure out to have financing available for the residents to say, okay, yes, I've got the equipment on my truck, I can charge it to this way it goes through, whether it's HUD or a different financing model to get this fixed? Because the last thing you want is, well, until you pay, now it's gonna, you know, I can't install this, and so now that house goes days, weeks, months with no power until you get there. So that is a real significant issue that no one envisioned when they started this. And so how do you you have to roll with the punches on this and figure out a mechanism to make it
I'm gonna suggest like, because since you brought this to our attention last week, I mean, I've been thinking about this. Clearly there's some additional money that needs to be set aside. I think it needs to be set aside for Luma. You know, if people are having solar on their house, they're getting the meter put on, it's part of the package. If it falls apart, the installer is going to have to fix it, and they're going to charge for them. It's change order.
Yeah.
But for you guys going around and putting in these meters, it is a problem, but it's a problem that needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed right away, like on the spot when it happens. That's the best thing to do. I think that we got to find, maybe it's run it through may have to run it through the regulator, but we effectively make the repairs, and we create an on-bill financing where they get to pay off, you know, the $900 over 3 years or something like that. Now, we're going to need funds like assigned to do that. And
Yep.
whether, you know, you're going to create a special charge, or whether, you know, you're going to find it. Obviously, there's an additional amount of working capital, though. I mean, it shouldn't be a horrendously large amount of working capital. But so long as you guys are available to do that, people know when you're coming to do that, that if it falls apart, you can fix it, but it's their risk. I'm sure you're going to have plenty of people shouting, but still, if you prep that, knows that they don't have to come out of pocket for it. It's there. We're going to fix it, but understand it's your responsibility. Your power will be working. And yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the solution that's going to be most efficient to actually just keep turning these things over.
Yeah,
Well, and I mean, you say
go
it's not a ton of money, Tom. It's if it's $1,000 a repair, and you know this might happen a million times over.
Well, there aren't that many meters, but
I don't know about that actually. I mean,
it doesn't
I don't know how many
happen.
meters there are,
It doesn't
but
happen all the time.
I don't know how many meters there are, but there's about 1 million you know, clients.
Well, 1.1 million meters is about what it is, and
Yeah.
they're guessing right now, but we're talking they're figuring 20% roughly. This
Right.
this probably occur. So I mean, and that's a total guess now. You may find out that it's better or worse, right? But
That's $200
right,
million.
it'll get figured out, and there'll be a
Yeah.
funding mechanism. I agree, but the issue is you go to fix an issue, and another problem crops up that you never envisioned happen, and so it delays the reaction to getting this. I'm convinced that in shortly it'll be completely ironed out, and like you say, this is the method to fix it. But it's just one of those other things where you're trying to make a difference, and this another challenge crops up that you didn't foresee.
I'll tell you, I mean, I actually think this is a great project for the Green Trust Fund. Right? I mean, effectively, you could collect it on bill. They could provide the money. They're going to get money this year. It is far and away the kind of thing that, you know, implementation they should be focused on. How to create the credit to solve these problems. So, I mean, why don't we? I want to know why Nellie's a member. I want to know why she's not on here right now. We should definitely have this conversation with Nellie Gorbea. I think, she should understand right away that there's a role there for the REIT trust. Yeah.
And help expose their own analog of what Luma's
Yeah.
experience here, which is, you uncover what you try to resolve one problem and you might discover other ones. And she might shed some important light on, well, if you try to do on-bill financing, this other element that we hadn't considered, or the green trust comes in, we have uncovered a whole different set of can of worms that we don't immediately have a plan for. Robert, I want to shift the conversation just in a slightly different direction. We got about 20 minutes left of our main conversation. There's a couple things I want to cover. What is the best way to think about end of life costs getting factored into the broader cost of grid operations and maintenance?
Well, and that comes down to a lot of the issues that the island has, that, let's just talk about generation. The average generation equipment in Puerto Rico is roughly 48 years old, and continental United States on average is 18 years. So you do have an end of life issue here that has to be addressed. On the same token too, if you look at, and this is just a metric, it doesn't necessarily equate to this, but you compare Mexico and the continental United States to how much distribution wire has gone up in the electrical system in those two areas in the last 3 or 4 decades, and it's grown. And actually in Puerto Rico, it's stayed flat or slightly declined. So this shows a lack of capital being put into transmission, distribution, and generation. And so now you've got an aging infrastructure in a tough environment with, in a hurricane zone and an earthquake zone that are really exposed to some issues here. And so we have to have a serious reckoning with this system. If you don't touch it for, several decades, and now you're going to have to bring it back up to speed. And so there's a lot of end of life things that are changing, which gives you a bit of an opportunity to kind of rebuild this a little bit differently than it traditionally was built. But there's a lot of things that are going to have to be addressed when you look at equipment is roughly 2x of what the rest of the United States typically is.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue in terms of comparing the grid quality, age, care, TLC that has been dedicated towards grid operations for a while, vis-a-vis the United States broadly. And I think it segues perfectly into my next question, which is, what's the best way to benchmark Puerto Rico? How do we compare Puerto Rico's crises, opportunities, trajectory with other jurisdictions, not only in the United States, and I know you have experience with other grid systems around the US, but also around the world? One of the things that, being from Minnesota, you'll appreciate, Minnesota is one of the country's leader in onshore wind, because it's incredibly flat, and in the Southwest, you've got a ton of wind, right? Yeah. That's not something that can be replicated everywhere. When we look at a lot of places that have high percentages of renewable energy injection into the broader matrix, a lot of those have 50+% of hydropower. Yeah. Which, as somebody who works in small turbines, tickles me pink, but it's not something that is particularly replicable in Puerto Rico. Nevertheless, the hydro in Puerto Rico is desperately in need of investment, and has a critical role to play as baseload power. It's proven technology. You really take advantage of what you have, and sometimes geologically. What Puerto Rico has in abundance is flat roofs and sunshine, and it's why we've seen the renewable energy technology is a term that can mostly be replaced by solar and storage, and that has its own end of life costs associated with it over the next 20-30 years. And the Puerto Rico Energy Forum is starting initial conversations on how do we have a regular sidebar on the circular economy, because we think that better talk about it before you hit crisis point, right? and it's going to be of critical import in the immediate future, let alone the 20-year future. But everywhere I look, I say, okay, that on one axis looks a lot like Puerto Rico, and on another it looks nothing like it. How do you understand best practices? What can be implemented? Where do you look for appropriate analogs? And to what extent can those models be developed further, or are we really just in uncharted territory?
No, we're not. I mean, I know like the DoD is I think by 2035 they're supposed to have their own sustainable microgrids running, and I believe mostly renewable energy. Universities are heavily into microgrids. I mean, we need to take our lead from some of those things which are smaller in scale, but really that gives you the idea what's going on right now. It's not, again, there's some challenges definitely in Puerto Rico, but this is not necessarily a strictly Puerto Rican problem. This is an island problem where you do not have the ability to get help from the state next door or the country next door. I mean, the Baja California, they trade energy back and forth between Southern California. There's ways to do that, but when you're an island, the service territory is very, very distinct. So you have issues with how do you make sure there's stability there. And it's one of those things where, I mean, honestly, I was at a conference this week and they talked about battery storage, in that if you take 100 megawatts offline from a traditional fossil fuel, you typically probably have to have 400 megawatts of solar and battery storage just to cover your bases for everything from, typically the batteries will run 8 hours. So you need 3 shifts of that. And then you have to have the ability to have some backup. So it's just not, that's one of the difficulties you have is when you take, there's a reason why fossil fuel has worked for so many years, because it's been the most efficient for energy delivery. There's a lot of other issues that we can talk about, but as far as energy delivery, it's been the most reliable. So now when you go to other systems, you have to put other contingencies in there. There's real estate concerns with solar, like how much do you go into agricultural areas, and how much does rooftop solar just get to the bottom line? Is it just augmenting it, or are you going completely in that direction? So those are things I think that haven't been completely decided yet. But we do have some leading areas here where the national labs are doing a lot of development in this area and can really be an asset to us. We've got the ability for federal funding to do this, but you're balancing new technologies and an aging infrastructure. It's as we talked about, it's remodeling the house while you're still living in it. It's not as simple as I think maybe it's portrayed. Or if you bring in a new outfit for the old outfit, everything's fixed. And no, these same problems still occur, right? So I think what we have to try and do is we always talk about the 3 R's in reliability, resilience, and renewable. And the number one priority is reliability. You got to get the uptime on the number of outages to drop way down, the length of the outages to drop way down. There's acronyms for that, but really what it comes down to is less and shorter frequency of outages. You get that stabilized first, then you can start talking about how do we make this more resilient? How do we introduce more renewable energy in there? But I mean, the short-term goal is I think the most important thing to begin with. And then once that gets started to stabilize, then we can address those other things. And your point though, Tom, is like, if you don't have the working capital to do that, it's kind of a lot of talking and not much we can do about it, right?
Yeah.
This is fundamentally, I think, going back to the theme of the evening's conversation, which is expectation management, and the way that the different powers that be, whether it's political voices or Luma, Genera, lo que sea, right? There's a lot of different voices. Preb, I think, has a important role to play here as well. The legislature, I'd love to see that, certainly from Fortaleza. Would love to see this type of thing where what you just laid out, Robert, is from my mind, a leadership opportunity if we'll have it, right? And there's a lot going for what's happening in Puerto Rico. Now, you have got to be delicate, because when people don't have power, and I count myself as part of that, saying everything's good, it falls on deaf ears, and people say, you got to be kidding, you're whistling past the graveyard, and this is a really tough issue.
Yeah.
And I don't see the progress. I don't feel it. My lights don't go on when I flip the switch, right? And so you can't convince me of progress that I've got to throw food away because my fridge is out for 6 hours on a hot day. That's a real issue that a lot of people face. But nevertheless, Puerto Rico has a lot of expertise that if we lean into the leadership role here for other Caribbean islands, other island nations around the world, and ultimately what we're seeing around the country with it, which is also increasingly aging in infrastructure, also challenges with regards to the working capital access of a different flavor, but nevertheless, how do you do what you need to do on a grid scale for the injection that we anticipate coming for massive renewables? And I think that we've talked about this with other guests of the Energy Forum. 50% of the island's economy is made up of manufacturers. Next week's conversation, we're talking with Elisa Wood from Microgrid Knowledge. She is a regular proponent of the idea that what you said, it may not be the fuel that makes us happiest, but there's a reason why data centers in particular use diesel generators. There's and to an earlier comment you made, which is if the transmission line's down, it doesn't matter if it's a diesel generator or a solar farm, it's not getting to the end user. Right.
No.
And so, and Tom and Arnaldo said this, the most expensive power is the electricity you don't have. And so we have a huge amount of expertise. I'll plug 2G Energy again here and our National Clean Energy Week and our gigawatt sponsor there, which is their main reason for being in Puerto Rico is helping industrial users set up cogeneration systems so that they have on-site power that's efficient, as clean as possible, given their needs. And reliable, right? And the fact in Puerto Rico that they can also save money is a big deal. But that sort of expertise is one that I would lean into. That complements perfectly the residential solar boom that we're seeing. Now it's a matter of let's lean into each one of these different areas and say, we are going to be leaders in the Caribbean. If you need a certain degree of energy expertise to help make sure that your energy system is put together right on whatever scale, resi, commercial and industrial or utility scale, it's a Puerto Rican expert that is really either going to be your, almost knocked over my Ocean Lab beer. It is either going to be your a Puerto Rican expert that's modeling your solution or actually implementing it, right? And that's a leadership thing. It's an expectation component, which is we're not there yet, but we have so many different parallel routes that are in progress that ultimately I think we should be proud of. Now, optimism and pessimism aside, there's a lot going for the existing state of things. And I think we are in a little bit of uncharted territory with that regards. We're not the only one facing this scenario, but I certainly feel like we're the most mature in terms of how we're dealing with it. We'll see.
Yeah.
Time will prove, but
The one challenge this industry has that no other industry really does, maybe outside of the government, is that there is no competition typically. So, with these being monopolies, you don't get to share best practices. So, Walmart.com learns from Amazon and vice versa, and they get better at doing their more efficient at their business, but if there's success at Southern Cal Edison in California, that success doesn't necessarily get transmitted over to other utilities across the country. So sharing of best practices tends to be a bit of an issue. And I think we talked about this before, but the utility in DC had this real problem about 12 years ago as well. And they spent a lot of time doing vegetation mitigation, putting in new underground feeders from an aging infrastructure. They did a lot of the things that Puerto Rico wants to do. And really sharing some of that expertise and best practices can really make this a little bit less painful. But they didn't venture into the renewable energy side of it. But when it comes to reliability area, that is something that we need to reach out to and see how other entities, whether it's domestically or if it's internationally, we can all learn from other people. But this industry tends to not necessarily that they don't share, but people don't tend to ask because you're in your own little fiefdom trying to make your service territory work. You're not necessarily saying, well, what are they doing in upstate Washington? What are they doing in Spain? What, that stuff isn't shared nearly as much. And I hope that gets better. That if we share best practices, it does. And one of the nice things of this versus like a consumer model is, if something in Portugal benefits the rest of the world, they don't lose anything by sharing it. Versus, an Amazon Walmart model, if they share their trade secrets, it can hurt their business. That's not the case in this area. So if we get better at communicating within the industry, I think get better at communicating to the customer base. Ultimately, I think that is going to be the best recipe for here's how we get from point A to point Z with the least amount of pain as possible.
Yeah, there's a codicil to that, which is few domestic for-profit utilities. I'm not quite sure so much about the national rural electric cooperatives, et cetera, which tend to be a little bit more chummy and share on a more regular basis. But they also tend to handle more things themselves. With the regulated utilities, kind of like the defense industry, there's a whole series of companies that serve that market. So if they come up with a solution, they don't want the utility to share any of the details other than that we've had great success. They want to take that and they want to sell it to a bunch of other utilities, and they want to say, hey, we successfully implemented it here. So I don't know if I completely agree with your statement about there's nothing to lose. There's nothing to lose from the utility standpoint, except that they might violate their warranty or whatever they're getting from the guys by sharing information. So I mean, a little bit of caution on that. I think the Enrica, by the way, they hate it when you call them Enrica, but it's what everybody calls them, are much better at doing that than you'll get lots of case studies at EEI once a year, right? On what's going on with the regulated Edison Electric Institute runs a national regulated utility conference where everybody comes once a year. So yeah, I there may be a bit more tension than that, but there's no reason, frankly, why Puerto Rico shouldn't be sharing and have more of a transparent, open book for the things that go on here.
Especially considering so much of it is federally funded. You would think that would be the repository for the central repository, right? For other models to be able to share. I mean, so much of the national laboratory system is designed to be a source of knowledge sharing.
So
Robert,
we're getting down to the end, right? And we do want to open it up for questions. I want to hopefully two things very, very quickly. Well, one anyway. I think we do want to be transparent. One of the things I'd like us to do, in terms of transparency, what's going on. If nobody else will educate, maybe we can find some additional funding or support to put in place a program to begin to educate people in Puerto Rico, reach with media, the radio stations. Like, we actually had the Fundación have a good relationship with Radio Grito. It's like they have the third biggest reach, and they cover a lot of the central part of the island, in-person type things, to have these kind of conversations, educate them, because there's a lot of mythology out there and about, who's to blame, right? Everybody wants to blame somebody, and I get it. Maybe we need to hold up a mirror first, and then work on the rest of it. But it's important to get that. And if nobody else will do it, then I think it'd be great, something for the forum to do. Then the second part is the better that we all are at that, and the more that it becomes clear to people that complaining, changing, getting rid of Luma, isn't actually going to solve anything for a number of years. That's great for the solar industry, by the way. But they're gonna want their own solar system even more, right? So the demand and the urgency of getting a solar and battery system is going to pick up, which kind of makes the short-term and medium-term problem even worse for the grid. But I'm telling you, that's a political third rail, right? That is going to happen, and there's nothing that you're going to do about it except work with the regulator and everybody else to move funds to be able to take as much power as we can and manage it on the grid as quickly as possible without it creating a problem. So the faster you get out in front of that, that's just a reality. And there's plenty of evidence from Hawaii where people were getting solar systems because of the very expensive nature of the power, and they liked it. And they had net metering, and they tried to put caps on it and stop people from interconnecting. And they just said, screw you, I don't need a thing. I'm going to put this stuff up. And so they had a whole black market plugging this stuff in. The utility complained and to the regulator and to the governor. But frankly, people wanted their solar systems. The governor guy goes, nah, I'm not going to do anything about it. If I do something like this, they're going to vote me out. So they basically turned around and said, deal with it, fix it.
So I want to, Robert, I'm going to give you the last word here in a second. But before I turn over and relinquish the floor and microphone to you, I want to make sure everybody knows that this time next Thursday, we have our Puerto Rico Energy in 60 Minutes segment. That is our topical monthly conversation, also at 6 p.m. Puerto Rico time, where we're talking about the last month of happenings, news notifications, topical conversations around what's happening in energy in Puerto Rico. We're particularly this month talking with, as I mentioned earlier, Elisa Wood. Elisa Wood was the founder of Microgrid Knowledge and recently left to start her own second now publication called Energy Changemakers. Focuses on distributed energy and the criticality of on-site power. And so I implore you all to join for that. Also engage with us on social media, engage with our emails. Let us know if you're going to be joining us for our September 24th PREF Live National Clean Energy Week event. We're going to hear from Luma. We're going to hear from Genera. We're going to hear from the DOE. We're going to hear from 2G with regards to industrial microgrids and a number of other critically important topics, some of which we covered today with Robert. And like our stuff, share it. Let us know let your network know that you're going to be there. We certainly appreciate your membership to the forum. Robert, my final question to you is really asking you to set the stage. Right, we're talking about expectation management. What are your expectations? How can you or communicate with the audience with regards to what should proper expectations look like for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I would first say that and I have conversations with the general public about this. Some of the questions are they really trying? And I'll say that technically they have a lot of engineers that are doing a lot to try and make this work. They're trying to fix things, but again, for something that has been really not maintained well for better part of 50 years, it's going to take some time. I hopefully they can get their message out there better, that they're trying to fix it. Here's what we're working on. Things like the PR 100 report and things have laid out some issues to try and address. And there are challenges out there, but no matter who's trying to achieve this, this is not a simple problem that can be simply eradicated in just a few short months. This is going to take some time, and say this is a gradual improvement. And people hopefully can have some patience. I understand the history that they have and reason why they are skeptical about it. And honestly, I would feel the same way if I wasn't involved intimately with what's going on here. But really, give some people some time. Let the bankruptcy work itself out there. Get some capital going into the system, and ultimately this can be one of the bright looking areas down the line, saying, look, they went from this situation to they are in a renewable microgrid that is top of the line in the country, and will be an emulation point for there. But it's going to take some time and patience.
Our guest tonight has been Robert Peterson. Robert, thanks so much for being a part of the Puerto Rico Energy Forum.
You bet.